You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, and welcome to episode 182 of the Soul Forge podcast.
Welcome to the Soul Forge, a place of silent mystery, quiet contemplation, and outright mayhem. Join your host, Shawn as he guides you through the adventures of living. Together, we'll talk about life and love, sex and dating, joy and heartache, memories and loss, and so much more. Don't worry, it's not nearly as pretentious as it sounds. Get ready for life, the universe, and everything on the Soul Forge.
Hello, everybody. It's Shawn here with another episode of the Soul Forge for you. This week is a special treat. As you may recall from last week's episode, I talked about how that Thursday, December the 3rd, I was going to be doing a live stream for the Indie Pods United collective, Facebook group, conglomeration of podcasts, whatever you want to call it. It's a great group, and it was a week-long celebration of podcasting and live streams and whatnot. And so what I did for you, in case you couldn't find the time or money or whatever to watch me on the screen, I recorded it on my iPad. So that's what this week's episode is going to be. It's going to be me talking about my podcast journey, how I got into it, what I've learned, and that kind of stuff. It's too bad that you couldn't have seen me doing the live stream because I was extremely nervous. People said I looked exhausted. I don't know how it actually turned out or not. I've gotten some pretty good feedback from a few people, but overall, what I wanted to do was give you all the experience as to how it turned out. So I'm not going to edit any of it. Normally I spend at least a half an hour to 45 minutes editing out the ums and the ahs and the breathing sounds and all that kind of fun stuff, but I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to play it for you exactly as it came out last week. So I believe there's actually an and remember in the thing and all kinds of stuff, so I'm not going to come back at the end of the show this week. I'm just going to go ahead and play a promo for another podcast on the ESO network. Then you're going to hear the live stream, and that's going to be it. So, thanks for coming by the Soul Forge, and stay tuned for last week's live stream.
My name is Mark McCray, and I'm the author of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives.
I'm Dan Klink, co-host of the Best Saturdays of Our Lives podcast.
The Best Saturdays of Our Lives features programming trends from the 1966 television season all the way through the last hurrah of the early digital age of the 1990s.
On the show, if it's animated, we talk about it.
Order your signed copy today at tbsool.com.
And listen to the podcast at esonetwork.com and all podcast platforms.
Hey everybody, welcome to my little corner of the internet here in podcast land. I want to thank Jeff for introducing me and Tina Marie and all the crew for putting this together. I don't normally live stream, so this is kind of nerve-wracking. The camera's right here, not on my screen that I'm looking at myself with. But anyway, I'm Shawn from the Soul Forge podcast, and what I'm going to do is just talk about my podcast journey pretty much. I just got off work, so I'm wearing my work t-shirt. It's nice and bright. You can see me, I'm sure. I don't even know who's watching. I can't see how many people are looking at me right now. So that's a lot of fun. I know my good buddy Dan is supposed to be out there watching me. So, hey Dan, how are you doing? Okay, so I got some notes here, and I'm just going to talk about my podcast journey. And I discovered podcasting back in 2012, I believe it was. I got a secondhand iPod, and I'm a mailman, as you can see by my work shirt here. And so instead of listening to music, I listened to podcasts, which I had just discovered in that year. And it got me through the day. It helped me with my work, made it go faster, and I wasn't alone with my own thoughts. And then we'll skip a year and a half in advance of that, and I thought to myself, you know what? I think I can do a podcast, because I'd heard all these people talking about Star Trek and history and all kinds of things that I was interested in. And you know what? I have things to say. I bet I could do that. And so I thought about it for a while, and I was like, what am I going to talk about that I can do week after week after week? Because most shows are weekly, some are bi-weekly, some are monthly, some are every day. And so I thought about it. And I've always been a big Star Trek geek, comic books, Star Wars, you name it, all that kind of good fun stuff. And years previously, I had come up with a name for a toy store that I wanted to open up here in Timmins. Now, give you some background. Timmins is in Ontario, Canada. It's up north. It's about 18 months of winter every year. It's cold. It's miserable. There's no culture here unless you're into drinking, drugs, and snowmobiling, which I'm not. So I'm like, you know what? Timmins is the land of culture forgot. I'm going to add some culture to it. So I asked the wife, and I said, "Do you want to start a podcast with me?" So we thought about it for maybe 3 months, and we came up with the name The Rusted Robot Podcast, which you can see right there on that shirt. Was the first podcast that I started. It premiered in January 2014, and it was all about geek stuff, pop culture news, casting news, movie reviews, comic books. Every episode had a robot profile in it. So we would talk about different robots from pop culture, and sometimes when there was actual robots in the news, we would talk about that as well. So that lasted with me and the wife for just over a year, and then there was trouble, so we split up. This would have been, February of 2015. So just over a year into the podcast, we split up. But we tried to continue on. Because we were good friends, and the marriage didn't work out. But we thought, I guess we could still podcast for a bit of time together. So we tried, but it didn't go too well. I don't even know how to describe it. It was awkward, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But we tried. From February up until September or so of 2015, we podcasted together, but not every week because we couldn't always get together. So sometimes I would have special guest hosts. Sometimes I would do episodes by myself. And that was never a good thing. So let me think here. I got my timeline. 2012, started listening to podcasts. 2014, started a podcast. 2015, early in 2015, the marriage split up. So I, on one of the episodes, I said, "Hey, if anybody out there in podcast land is looking to start up a podcast or something, I'm going to have some free time. So if anybody wants a co-host on a podcast, I would be happy to help out." And so then my good buddy Paul from the UK reached out and said, "You know what? I've always wanted to start a podcast. Let's go ahead and we'll do that." So in 2015 and 16, Paul and I did 40 episodes of something called the Sci-Fi Waffle Podcast, which was similar to the Rusted Robot Podcast in that it was pop culture and it was a bi-weekly show. So it lasted just over a year. And we didn't have a lot of listeners, so Paul pulled the plug on that, and that was okay. But I kept on with the Rusted Robot Podcast with me and the ex at that point, and guests and the Lonely Shawn episodes, which I will talk about shortly. So in September of 2015, her and I pulled the plug on our collaboration, and we just decided that was enough. That no more podcasting together. So I actually took 4 months off and didn't do any podcasting at all. And then there's a local comic book shop here in town called Jump City Comic Books, and I knew one of the owners, and she said her husband would be an excellent co-host for me. So we started talking, and he joined me on episode 91, and henceforth, throughout the history of the Rusted Robot, he's been the co-host all along, and sometimes the wife is on there as well. And the co-host's name is Josh, and he is the one who termed those solo episodes the Lonely Shawn episodes, because instead of talking about pop culture, it turned out I was actually talking about how much I missed being married and stuff, and it wasn't fitting the theme of the Rusted Robot Podcast, obviously. So what happened next? Well, let me think here. So we split up, but going back a little bit further, how did we get started? Well, we started talking about pop culture. We started talking about local events. Reached out to different Facebook groups, I guess, is how this all came about, and Twitter as well, which is very important when you first get started to be on there. You almost need a social media secretary to run all your social media now, because it's just too much. There's too many things. But in the early days of 2014, Sina, the host of the 10 Forward podcast, reached out and said, would you like to be on the show? And I said, okay. So we were a guest on there, and that's how we got all of our British listeners. And that's how we actually got pretty well known, which was good. If it not for Sina, the Rusted Robot wouldn't have been a thing at all, I don't think. So we did that, and then reached out to Larry Nemeczek, and I can see Dan on the screen. He says, "Rip Sci-Fi Waffle Pod." You are watching, Dan. I'm glad to see you there. I don't know who else is out there in land, but glad to see you all here. So anyway, Larry Nemeczek was on a Facebook group, and I said, "Oh, hey Tina, good to see you too." Okay, so there are people. I didn't know how this was actually going to work. Wow. So Larry Nemeczek, he's in the periphery of Star Trek. He's written some books, and he acted in a fan film and so on, and he does his own podcasts and stuff. So he was our first interview, which was awesome, a semi-famous guy. And then I reached out to my favorite author of all time, Robert J. Sawyer, and got him, and that was a pretty cool interview. And then just regular podcasting stuff went on and on and on, and it was all fine. It was good. So then the year went up, and we split up, and got a new co-host. And what we decided to do was, because Bridget's, that's the ex-wife, her name was Bridget, episode 68 of Soulforge Podcast, if you want to know the whole story. But between episode 91 and 100, I would always say to Josh, the co-host, I would say, Bridget wanted to be here, except whatever. There would be some kind of pop culture reason why she didn't. And then in episode 100, I killed her off and never talked about her again, which was probably for the best. So that was 2016 when Josh took over as co-host, and he's been there ever since. And now his wife's on there pretty much every week ever since COVID hit. So yeah, that's what happened this year. COVID hit. So Rusted Robot Podcast was a lot of Lonely Shawn episodes, because we couldn't get together. So I did the best I could to keep the show afloat, and it's been doing okay. It's anybody who's been following me for the last 7 years, like Richard from Australia and other people, they know the journey that I've been on, and it's been quite the adventure. So if you've listened to all of my episodes, first I want to apologize, and second, you know me probably better than I know myself. So let's see what else I've got here on the list. So we did Rusted Robot, we did Sci-Fi Waffle for 40 episodes, and then in 2017, I got to thinking that I'd had some adventures, and I needed some self-therapy. I didn't want to go see a therapist per se. So what I did was I started the Soulforge podcast, and I thought about it for a good year or so. What kind of name did I want? What was it going to be? Weekly, bi-weekly? Was it going to be a 5-minute daily tune-up about my crazy dating life? Because once the marriage ended and I moved out on my own, I went in kind of a tailspin, and didn't know if I was coming or going half the time. So it was hectic. It was stressful. It wasn't a lot of fun. There were fun moments, of course. But anyway, so July 2017, I think, is when we launched. July 31st, 2017. And today, actually, episode 181 came out. So it's still going strong. Soulforge is going really strong. It's really awesome. I do it every week, almost without fail, I think. So it's a lot of fun. If you haven't listened to Soulforge, you definitely should. It's kind of self-therapy. I almost called it Life Garage to start with. Life Garage. Go fix yourself, that kind of thing. So there's that. What else do I got on my list here? Well, I had a lot of things to say, so with Rusted Robot, I didn't want to talk about the personal life so much, so that was another reason for Soulforge. Also, to talk about things that people don't talk about. Like a lot of times, mental health is a big stigma. So I think it was 2019 was the big year of mental health, where a lot of the episodes were all about that. I've had people on there who, and actually it's a podcast about anything. Anything goes. It's life, the universe, and anything. And I've had people who have survived suicide attempts. I've had people whose parents have dementia and how they have to take care of those people. I've had authors. I even had a guy named Muggsy who lives in Australia, and he wants to be the Australian Eminem. So I've interviewed rappers. There was a sex goddess from San Diego who I interviewed as well. Episode 49, actually. Muggsy was 47, I think. Sometimes I just remember episode titles, numbers, and so on, but not always. Like the ex-wife episode was episode 68 of Soulforge. The one where I got the divorce was episode 51. About a year and a half ago, I was going through a mental breakdown. Nothing major, just life was stressful. So episode 101 was called Existential Crisis. So it's pretty much almost like an online diary is what the Soulforge is. And what else did I want to tell you guys about Soulforge? Well, you should be listening, definitely. It's self-therapy. It's talking about things that people don't talk about. Let me just pull up my actual app here on the phone, because there's a quick launch app that you can get. And today's episode was called These Emotions, Though. And I was talking about just generally how things have been very emotional lately. So I talked about that. Last week was talking with my girlfriend about death rituals, because a lot of times people don't want to talk about what's going to happen after they're dead. So we called that episode Over My Dead Body, and we talked about what we want when we're dead. The week before was me trying to decide what new car to get. So I always elicit responses from the listeners out there, or at least I try to. That's the one thing I didn't realize about podcasting, is most of your audience will not send you an email. Before that, I had an interview with my son talking about when I was his age, back in 1990 when I was 14. So that brought back a lot of memories. And then previous episodes, Don't Mask Your Passion. That was me talking about how I'm a big Star Trek fan, but I'm scared or embarrassed to display that on the outside. So like if I had a mask, let me see here. So we all have to wear these stupid masks, right? And this is just a plain one that you can see from the video if you're watching. It's just a plaid or whatever. And my brother had posted on my Facebook. He said, "Here's a nice Star Trek mask for you." And I said I couldn't do it. I couldn't wear a Star Trek mask out there because that would be displaying my geekdom on my sleeve. I got these T-shirts that I sometimes wear, all about podcasting. I've got a Bishop tattoo, which is a character from the X-Men. I've got a Star Trek pinup lady on my leg. My car is full of stickers of different pop culture stuff, which all seems to be fine, but wearing a Star Trek T-shirt or a mask, it's embarrassing. So there's kind of a disconnect there for some reason. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand myself sometimes, but that's the way life works. So there was that one. I've done lots of episodes with my brother, Robin. He's an interesting character. If you've listened to Soulforge before, you know his complete journey. But yeah, so that one was called Calm, Cool, and Collected, because his last name is Cool. So yeah, it's you have to listen to these episodes to really understand, because he ruined his life. He moved from Sault Ste. Marie all the way to Timmins here, which is 5 or 6 hours away, and he ruined his life in, was it 2019? I think it was 2019 at the beginning. He lost his job, he lost his house, he lost his car, he lost everything, and so he moved here to live with his brother for a bit, and he did. He didn't really get his life back on track. He didn't save any money, but we lived together for about 1.5 years, so it was good, because I haven't lived back home in about 20 years, so I hadn't lived with any family that I grew up with in 2 decades. So he's an interesting character. Lots of episodes with him on there. His buddy, Whit. Robin and Whit had started the Space Jam podcast a bunch of years ago, and that's now gone out of print because they stopped doing it. But we would often do crossover episodes, and Whit has been on the Soulforge podcast a few times, because he was 28 before he had sex for the first time, and he wanted to share his journey. So I believe he's now 30, and in the last 2 years, he had sex for the first time. He got his first girlfriend. He got his first girlfriend pregnant, and now they're engaged. So within 2 years, his life has completely changed, and he's actually starting a podcast soon, I guess. It's not out yet. I think he's calling it the Everything Under the Sun podcast, if that's the name that he decides to go with. So podcasting is a great way to meet a lot of people, and I'll tell you. Have I met a lot of people? Yes, I have. I've gone to conventions and met certain people, and I got them to do little voice clips. Like, for example, in 2014, I went to Toronto Fan Expo, which was a huge Canadian geek fest, basically. And I got to meet Edward James Olmos, who played Admiral Adama on Battlestar Galactica. He's famous. You would know who he is. He's pock-marked face. I guess he had a lot of acne or chickenpox or something. But we got him to do a voice clip. I got Stephen Amell from the Arrow TV show to do a voice clip, and I play those sometimes in the Rusted Robot podcast. Like I said earlier, I met Larry Nemeczek. I met, online I met him, of course, not in real life, Robert J. Sawyer, my favorite author, who I actually met last year in Atlanta, Georgia, when I went to 2019's Dragon Con. He had a panel, and I waited for him after the show, and took a picture with him, and it's awesome. So you got to meet all kinds of people. 2 years ago, I went to Thunder Bay, which is another northern Ontario town. It's about the 10 to 12 hour drive from here, and not a lot of people know this, but I'm part of the Klingon dress-up cosplay group here in Timmins, and we were guests of honor, and we had to wear our I should have brought it, I don't know where it is, but my Klingon forehead, and our outfits, and whatever. And we went to the bar that night, and one of the guests, the famous people at the convention, was Paul McGillian, who played on Stargate Atlantis. And I think he's Canadian. He was in Star Trek 2009 for a brief moment. But he's famous in geek circles. And so he was there, and another actor from another Stargate show was there as well. And so I was at the bar, and I was waiting to get his attention so I could get him to do a voice clip for the podcast, because that's what it's all about, is getting famous people to say the name of your podcast. And so he saw me, and he saw some other guy waiting, and it turns out that I look like the creator of the Stargate show, and the other guy, who I didn't know, looked like the other creator. So there's two creators of the show, and the celebrities wanted pictures with us. Can you imagine that? I should look at the camera, not at my screen. But anyway, so yeah, I got a picture that it was taken because the famous guy wanted my picture, and that's amazing. And then I got the voice clip from him as well for the podcast. So that's cool. You get to meet all kinds of different people for doing all kinds of different things. Sometimes it's because of podcasting. Sometimes it's geek conventions. And who knows what else. And hey there. I'm just saying hello to all the people who are saying hi to me that are watching. It doesn't actually tell me on my screen who it is unless they pop up and say hello. But I appreciate the feedback and the support from all of you guys out there in podcast land watching me. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. What else we got? So we did celebrity encounters. We got the picture taken. Yeah, that's really about it. For how the Soul Forge got started, we started with Rusted Robot, Sci-Fi Waffle, transitioned into Soul Forge podcast. This way, right here. And another fun thing to do is you get these stickers made from Vistaprint or wherever. And when I go around the country, what I do is I stick them in bathrooms, on urinals, or on drive-through walls to get the word out. And I do business cards. It's double-sided, you see, because if you're watching the video, one side says Rusted Robot Podcast, the other side says Soul Forge Podcast, and any way you can get the word out, that's awesome. That's the best way to do that. And I'm going to tell you about another podcast that a couple of us started not too long ago. I think it started up in June of this year. So you remember how I talked about Paul, my co-host on Sci-Fi Waffle? Well, my good buddy Dan, also from the UK, Paul and Dan live in the UK, and we've been Facebook friends, podcast friends for years and years. I'm not even sure how it all started. That's the thing with podcasting. You meet so many different people around the world that it's kind of like a journey around the world without actually going anywhere. And what happened was Dan does the Temporal Trek podcast, which is a Star Trek rewatch podcast, but he goes in chronological order from like the Big Bang all the way to the end of history. So he doesn't watch the episodes as they were produced. He watches individual clips, time frames, and it's really unique podcast. It's really good. If you're not checking out Temporal Trek, well, you should. But anyway, we were doing a recording for that. I think it was Paul and Dan and Shawn. That's me. And so we did it, and we're like, you know what? We have great chemistry. Why don't we start up our own podcast? So guess what? We did. It came out June 24th. I think we've done 15 or 16 episodes so far. It comes out every 2 weeks on Wednesdays. It's called the Cosmic Pizza Podcast. And where did we get that name? Well, it's kind of like Soul Forge. We're trying to forge our soul. We're trying to become the best people that we can over here on Soul Forge. But Cosmic Pizza encompasses everything as well. We're talking about everything. So it's geeky, but it's not just geeky. Like we've talked about how we would live a life if we were immortal. We've interviewed a guy who owns one of the only 2 video rental stores in the UK. We talked to some horror filmmakers. We've just talked amongst ourselves about cyborgs and androids. We've talked about all kinds of different things. 15 or 16 episodes are out, and it's great. The best part of that, I don't have to do any of the editing, because for Rusted Robot, all the editing is me. Soulforge, also me, because I'm the only host. Sci-Fi Waffle, I think Paul did all the editing there, and Paul's once again doing all the editing on Cosmic Pizza, and it's nice just being the talent. Me and Dan are the talent, and we take turns co-hosting it. So it's my 3rd podcast, and oh, that's right. Good thing I wrote these notes down. See, notes, because I would forget everything. So, Soulforge and Rusted Robot are on the ESO network. That's the station for all things geek. And if you like podcasts, if you like geekery, the ESO network is the place to go. I think it's esonetwork.com for all the shows. There's between 20 and 30 shows on there, and it's a lot of fun being part of a network, because I'm always trying to make my reach larger, and just word of mouth, being in Facebook groups, being on Twitter is not enough. So what we do in the ESO network is we play a promo for another podcast on the network, and they play our promo. So we all have different audiences, and if our promos are good enough, then people are going to say, hey, that's an interesting promo. I'm going to check out that podcast. And has it helped me? I don't know. I don't have a lot of listeners. I got a good amount, but I could always use more. I could always use more listeners, more feedback. Sponsors would be good. I once had a sponsor for ties, but nobody ever bought any ties from them, because I guess I didn't have enough audience, or his ties weren't very good, so I never got any money for that. But it's what happens. What else have I got here on the list? Oh, right, yes. I got home like a few minutes before starting this episode, and got an email from Pandora. I guess I had applied to be on the Pandora platform 2 months ago, and I was finally approved. So Soulforge is on Pandora and Stitcher and Spotify and Podbean and TuneIn and Apple Podcasts and all the different things. So if you like my style of presentation that you're hearing and seeing right now, that's awesome. I'm a bit nervous, of course, because I'm on camera and I don't know who's watching me, so the flow isn't that great, and I'm not editing any of this stuff, right? Because it's just flow and word of mouth. I'm actually recording it, so this will be next week's episode of Soulforge Podcast. So next week's episode is already done. I just have to put a promo in and an ending and a beginning and all the different things, and there you go. So that's about it. So, once again, this is an appeal for all of you out there in podcast land to check out Rusted Robot Podcast if you're looking for weekly, geekly pop culture news. Soul Forge is all about life and living and stupid things we do for love. A lot of embarrassing stories. I've really hung it all out there on Soul Forge, and I've said things that I probably shouldn't say sometimes, but it's what we do. Temporal Trek with Dan. Go check that out if you like Star Trek. Cosmic Pizza Podcast. You never know what the episode is going to be about, so check that out. What else have I got to say? I think I've said everything on my list. Am I almost out of time? I'm almost out of time too. So I've talked about all the different podcasts. I've talked about my crazy journey of podcast land. I've talked about the t-shirts and the business cards. What else do you need to know? Email my shows, soulforgepodcast@gmail.com or therustedrobot@gmail.com if you want any more information. If you'd like to be a guest on Soul Forge, I'm always looking for guests, so that's a fantastic thing to have, to meet new people and talk to people from around the world. Check out Cosmic Pizza Podcast because we could always use some more listeners over there. And other than that, I end every show of mine with an "and remember." So I'm just going to say, and remember, life isn't meant to be easy, it's meant to be lived. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Soul Forge Podcast. Your support is greatly appreciated, and we hope you'll tune in again next time. Remember that you can visit soulforgepodcast.com for all of our social media links, and don't forget to share the show with everyone you know. The Soul Forge Podcast is your best source for living your best life.
Think about it.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.